Ian and Jonathan, we ready to go? Okay, I love using this light. There we go. Roll call. Mr.
Trumbull here.
Siegel here.
Schwartz present.
Danaher here.
Forcell here.
Johnston here.
All right. Wonderful. Members of the public invited to comment. Now, Jeff, you had a comment. Do you want to wait till we get to that agenda item, or do you want to speak now? You'll wait. Now? No. Wait. Okay, great. We'll do that. No other oral communications at the moment. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Passed unanimously. Judith, I record you as approved.
Well, I abstained because I wasn't.
Oh, okay. All right.
Wasn't there.
All right. I'll abstain too. I wasn't there either. So it passed, but with 2 abstentions. Right. All right. Any comments on the agenda from folks? All right. Okay. Terry, we're recording you as approving the minutes. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You didn't hear my vote?
I didn't. I wanted to make sure. Reports from commissioner meetings and events. Judith?
Well, I have some since that was why I wasn't here last time. So one of the things I've been very involved with lately that was during this last period was the low-income community solar working group, and so we ended up having another in-person meeting and some webcasts, and I think that the material that we got out of that, and it's going to be published in February, I think now. They're going to be releasing it. But I think it's going to be very instructive for us as a way to, as a mechanism, to look at some of the issues to look at community solar in terms of locational value and other things that even if we're not necessarily doing it to support low-income consumers, there are things that I think are of value to us. So one of the things I'd like to be able to do is figure out a way to get some of the materials on the agenda so that we can talk about it, because there's some good stuff that came out. The other event that I went to that I was here when the last meeting was the Gridwise Alliance's annual conference, which is called Grid Connects, which was in DC. And, you know, it's kind of a general purpose conference on various grid issues and grid modernization. But there were 2 things that really struck out for me that were very relevant for us. So one of them was I got to talk to the person who had been the vice president at PEPCO over some technical areas that covered undergrounding. And so I was talking to her about what we were doing here, and you know, it was very supportive of what staff was doing in terms of the pad-mounted devices, that was sort of the state of the art. They have one of the oldest undergrounding situations in the country, and so they're dealing with the problems of trying to do smart grid and also trying to deal with so much underground and what happens when things break, and you know, what are the trade-offs? What I learned, so she's going to sort of try and get me in touch with some people, but what I also learned from that is that there isn't a publication that exists that helps lay it out succinctly. So I was talking to my friends at DOE to say, hey, I think that's one you need to work on. So that was one thing. The other thing was there was a presentation by Jonathan Salk, who is the son of Jonas Salk, who invented the polio vaccine. And he gave a keynote that was about the inflection point of what happens when you're going, you know, this curve that goes when you're going from one set of issues and how you kind of manage society to this inflection point where you're going in another direction. And it completely relates to the impasse that we have as a country, both politically and what's happening in terms of energy and how you're doing generation and how it's changing. And it was just it was just like this mind-blowing, fabulous presentation where the light bulb went off. And I would like to see, again, if there's a way that we can put it on the agenda to talk about this thing, because there were some graphics that he used that were so insightful that you just go, oh my God, this is what the problem is. And so how you do that transition, I think we're at that inflection point. So I think it would be very useful for us. So that's my comment from my meetings.
All right, wonderful, thank you. Others? So I apologize, I was away last month for the meeting. I have working with a group of utilities in Europe and some from North America. We get together about trends in innovation, how to help and speed those along. A lot of attention over there, and our next meeting is in smart homes, but beyond that, virtual power plants and buildings as power plants, all about distributed energy resources, which I see we're going to redo the RFP for that, and it's going to be very exciting for us to address over the next couple of years. On that score, I've been conscious, EV penetration and Palo Alto being in the lead there, of EVs as a source of distributed storage. And I was pleased to see this morning, I was at the CES convention yesterday and today, Nissan has actually come out with a product that is for vehicle to home. Now they have a separate unit, it's only available for sale in Japan, you plug that in, but then your vehicle can discharge into that and power your home. And one other Japanese automaker there is talking about doing it. They didn't have anything to demonstrate or sell yet, but that's coming too. So again, more excitement down the road. That's all for me on that. So we'll go on to General Manager Utilities report. And
good evening, Chair Denneher, Commissioners. Happy New Year. So I have a couple items that I'd like to talk a little bit about. So first thing is that we're starting to see natural gas prices spike in December, and they're kind of fluctuating a little bit in January, but they're kind of evening out in that period of time. So gas prices are spiking in the month of December, but we've seen a decrease that we would normally anticipate during this period of time of the year, but the CPA purchased natural gas for its customers from the market, and the monthly fluctuations in the market prices are based along to, and we pass those along to our residents and to the businesses with the natural gas. Palo Alto is not unique to this, and as other utilities are doing the same, PG&E that purchases natural gas from the market is also affected by these rate changes. And we're proactively reaching out to the community members, and in December we informed the people that of these increases that would be occurring, and that conversations with the gas and possibly in order to avoid these high bills. So we've given them some tips, some ideas on how they can lower some of that gas prices as we've seen, as they hopefully do some efficiency pieces around that. But it's starting to stabilize in this period of time, but the January bills will come out, and customers will see a little bit of a larger.
what's the magnitude of the increase?
So December gas prices were about double what they were in the summer. That's gas commodity prices, which are actually about a third of the total gas rate. So gas rates were about 25% higher, I think, was the rough number. They were at about 60, or sorry, yeah, they dropped by about 50% in January, back to what we might more normally expect. So we've been doing some outreach to customers. We started in December so that if people wanted to adjust their usage, they could do that. And we're, if people continue to conserve, that's great, but we're also passing the word back out to the key accounts and letting the customer service reps know that the spike has largely resolved itself, and so if people have gas needs that are really critical for them, they shouldn't worry as much about the price spike.
So moving on, a little bit more disturbance in our streets for a little bit of period of time. PG&E is planning to begin work later this month on one of their large gas transmission pipelines that runs through Palo Alto, that goes from Palo Alto basically up to Hillsburg. And this is to replace some areas of pipe that are needed for some maintenance and ensure safety and reliability. So they have a device. So we have an end point or a beginning point, depending on which way they run this apparatus, which is called a pig, which is located down on the bay shore. And this is going to run through 24-inch pipe. It's able to look at any kind of corrosion points, maybe some dents that might happened on this transmission line. It also talks about if the wall thickness, if they see deterioration because of this corrosion that happens. So, and they have found some areas in Palo Alto. Now they've reduced the pressure in that one line by 20% at this point. And so over the next 5 to 6 months, there'll be a number of sites throughout the city where PG&E will start to trench the streets and then be able to accommodate this work. The first major construction area will be along Loma Vista near the intersections of Kipling, and staff's working with PG&E to provide advance notice to the schools as well as to the neighborhoods along with PG&E as they go through this. And our engineering operation teams are also coordinating with PG&E throughout the duration of this project. So we're thinking that they have to be done by the end of June. It's regulated by the CPUC, so this is something that they're going to probably be working on in the areas. They are going to curtail their hours starting around 9 to 3, and then they will probably work some Saturdays on this. So we will see some road diversions, possibly maybe some lanes closed down during that period of time, but it'll be until June. Again, like I said, it's regulated by the CPUC from the safety hazard that they have to deal with on that. And then moving on, Palo Alto turns 125 years. So this marks the 125th anniversary of the city of Palo Alto. And we're going to celebrate this milestone throughout the year in promotions and special events. So stay tuned as we identify ways and highlight our accomplishments over the time and celebrate the great community. So we have things planned as we move forward. One of that will be the upcoming event to save is Saturday, April the 13th. The city once again is hosting the great race for saving water. A fun, friendly run and a walk to the Baylands, plus the Earth Day festivals, joined with a special time this year as the city celebrates the 125. So we're going to really push that out and celebrate. And then after the 5 and 10 and 1K kids fun run to enjoy fun festival of the electric vehicles ride and drive. There'll be some nature activities, some live music and art crafts, raffle prizes, and the community booths with active demonstration in environment and public safety resources. So if anybody asked a little bit about that, so we put up a website, and it's around City of Palo Alto around Earth Day. And that's my report.
Commissioner comments?
So last month, a respected council member told me that the mayors do not serve as liaison for the various city committees. So I gave the mayor the choice of suppressing me and me just making the joke to him personally, but he didn't stop me. So I just kind of wondering whether we're breaking precedent here. And if so, I would hope that, because this is just a ceremonial position, so he's going to have to be the running toilet in our 125th water saving and other things. So I do hope you break precedent and hang around here and get a little substantive stuff.
It's standard practice in the city that the mayor can step in if a designated commission member is not available.
All right. Well, we're happy to have you, of course.
Yeah, I hope you got that between the lines. Sort of.
So I wanted to make a comment about something that I saw in the minutes, which I didn't comment during the minutes since I wasn't there. But there was a discussion about when we did the resilience workshop, whether it made sense to have experts. And I would like to suggest that the problem isn't having experts, the problem is how you use the experts. And if we use the experts poorly and don't have information exchanges with them, that's what the problem is. And so I think in terms of if we can get people who are nationally known experts to come in and talk to us about things that are of interest to us, that may have information that our staff people won't have, that we should get them and just make sure we use them in a way that's effective. So I just wanted to comment on that I thought that was, at least the way, I don't know what your discussion was, but the way it came out in the minutes, it came out that it was somehow bad to have experts, and I want to just challenge that from that perspective.
Thank you for that.
I just want to add a follow-up on that. The first two speakers, I went and told them, in essence, that they needed to speak in plain English and use terms that people could understand, and they chose not to do it anyhow. And you may recall that somebody in the audience after the first one complained they didn't understand, and then the second one was interrupted by the woman running the meeting to tell them to talk in English. So I think that they decided their orientation was solely towards selling themselves to staff, and I would hope staff will tell them to get them to speak in terms that the audience can understand next time.
There was dissatisfaction with how that meeting went, so before we have another one, I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to discuss how to structure.
Okay, so I feel, as the person who recruited them, okay, I just want to say that they were not given any guidance from our staff about what the presentation should be. They were, when I had positioned it to them, I had positioned to them that we would be asking them questions, okay? And so I think that they were not there as salespeople. They were there doing a favor to me. So I think that it's on us that we didn't use them well, okay? And so I think to cast aspersions on them that they were somehow doing something inappropriate is not a fair characterization of who they are and why they were there.
That's very useful. Thank you for mentioning that. All right, shall we go on to the next agenda item, which is about update on our activities to facilitate DER adoption and next steps.
Good evening, Commissioners. Assistant Director of Resource Management, Jonathan Oppenschein. We're bringing to you tonight a discussion of distributed energy resources. About a year ago, we came to you with a distributed energy resources plan, and in the process of trying to, and it was a draft plan at that point, we didn't ask for a formal action. In the time since then, we've taken a number of actions that we talked about in that plan, and in developing this report, we realized that a lot of the things that we're doing on distributed energy resources are actually encompassed in a lot of other plans, some of which are summarized in the appendix to your staff report. And so rather than creating yet another plan, we decided a better way to handle these discussions would be to give you an overview of all of the different actions that we are planning to engage in around distributed energy resources, which plans they're memorialized in, and not all of those actions are memorialized in plans that have been adopted yet, but there are some that are there are some plans that we're planning to bring. But still, give you an opportunity to talk about all of these actions in one comprehensive discussion, and the feedback that we get from you will be incorporated into the relevant plans. So that's the general frame for this discussion, and I'll turn the discussion over to Shiva Swaminathan, Senior Resource Planner.
Thank you, John. So as John mentioned, we were here in November discussing the draft DER plan. So this is an update since then. So what's on the screen here is a timeline of reports and discussions we've had since November. We had extensive distribution system assessment in April, where we discussed that there were no major constraint in our distribution feeder level, but number of constraints could materialize in the distribution transformer level. And then UAC approved the AMI and technology plan, which Council subsequently approved in December. And you all approved the EIRP, Integrated Resource Plan for Electric. And then you also reviewed in October the customer survey results, which will inform our customer programs plan, which we plan to bring to you in the spring. So today is an update. So our focus areas we've outlined in 5 areas. The number 1 being overall business strategy and operation planning related to DER. There are 2 major elements to it: the importance of AMI implementation, and the other is how do we encourage distributed resources as well as maintain the utilities competitiveness as these resources proliferate. So those are the 2 areas we're going to work on under the broader heading of business strategy and operations planning. And the second area is electric supply planning. We need to understand the DER forecast so that we can manage and purchase external energy resources. So that's where that interfaces. That's focus area number 2. Focus area number 3 is on distribution system planning. We had an extensive discussion about 9 months ago. So we are working on those major areas. One particular, the last bullet there under distribution system planning is on microgrids. Our strategy has been to encourage and facilitate microgrids at customer premise level, not necessarily utilities maintaining a microgrid system. One of the highlights of the projects which we've received recently is VMware's interest to explore a microgrid project on their campus, and we are collaborating with them to see what they would like to do. John, would you like to add?
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that project, aside from the small pilot project that we talked to you folks about in the general manager comments, and I know some Commissioner Schwartz in particular was able to attend the kickoff for that project. And Commissioner Siegel, and I apologize, Vice Chair Schwartz. There's a larger campus project that they'd like to do, a campus-wide microgrid project. It's very much in the early conceptual stages right now, but as we hear more about that and have something more concrete to discuss with you, we'll definitely have some discussions with you about that this year.
Okay. And then the 4th element related to DER is a customer retail rate design. There are many elements we're exploring. One of them is an all-electric, if there is an all-electric home, to have an all-electric home retail rate. And then potentially providing a bill discount for electric homes with electric vehicles using the low carbon fuel standard funds. And then looking at the retail rates, the impact, how they would encourage or facilitate DERs. So those are the 3 areas of the customer retail rate design element. And then the 5th element is customer program design. We've analyzed the customer survey results, and we are seeking input from commercial customers, and we'll be bringing a customer program plan in the spring to the Commission for discussion. So that's broadly the 5 areas within utilities we think about when we think about DERs, and we would like your input on those major 5 areas, work items the next 2 to 3 years, and then also the takeaways, which is in the report, takeaways from the residential DER survey. Would like your input on those items.
That's specifically attachment B of your staff report.
So I was particularly struck by the fact that, you have a section for smart appliances, and then there's nothing about smart appliances. I just want to say that a power strip is not considered a smart appliance. What I think the industry means when it talks about smart appliances are dishwashers and refrigerators and things that change their normal cycle as a result of being given signals from the grid. And I think that I realize that's what we asked, but I think that just because we ask it and we put that label on it doesn't make it so. And so I think that if we, right now, there's nothing that can be done with, with learning thermostats and smarter thermostats to do that, and I agree with that one. Again, is a useful thing to do with price signals, though I don't think it's really an appliance. And I think that we've got to, our lack of specificity in how we use language and terms and just applying things to wherever we want to apply them doesn't serve us well in sort of really getting from other things. And I want to echo that in terms of the customer awareness on item F of 100% carbon neutral electricity. So one of the things that keeps coming up is that people don't understand what this term means. And I thought it was really interesting that in there was a city council meeting where former Mayor Burt got up to talk about the treatment plant, and again, made it sound like the electricity that would run the treatment plant would be zero carbon, okay, and would be carbon, and this difference of what do you mean by that, and carbon neutral is not the same as zero carbon or carbon free, and I think we're misusing these terms, and we're confusing a lot of people. And I think that to me, I look at the results of the survey and say, all that does for me is just reinforce for me that people don't understand the term and how we're meaning it. And just to keep repeating it doesn't help us. And this idea of, if we're looking at the electrification of natural gas appliances and the electricity to run those is coming from natural gas plants 200 miles away, that's not better from a carbon perspective. So I think that we just need to be clear, because I think we continue to reinforce this bad information that's going out there. And so the city council is making decisions based on misinformation. And I think it's got to come from the utility to the city council, since we don't get to be the ones to communicate with them that they're misusing the terms. So I just think that that's a really important point that we need to address.
Carrie, your light is on. Did you want to add?
Let's see, I have some thoughts. Where to start? So I marked up my report, and then I marked up the printout of the slides. So my understanding is that the utility is going to look into customer retail rate design as part of its plan going forward. And the report mentions time of use rates. But it's unclear whether staff plans to examine time of use rates as part of the next wave of retail rate design, or whether that was only looking in the rearview mirror and not something you're planning to examine going forward. Because I'll say, if we do want to look at it going, yep.
Yeah, so time of use rates are absolutely in the long-term plans, but we we're not going to be able to implement them or fully implement them until we have a smart grid system.
Of course.
If there is a way, if there are targeted customer types or places where we might be able to roll them out, for example, we were able to do a time of use pilot with the Customer Connect program, and if there are similar opportunities, we can look for those, but absent those opportunities, we wouldn't be able to roll out a time of use rate until the smart grid system's available.
So my question is, how are you thinking about time of use rates at this point? Since traditionally, that's, in its simplest version, is cheaper rates at night. But if we're aiming for low carbon, to Vice Chair Schwartz's point, that seems to be directly at odds with the behavior that we're trying to incentivize. So I'm wondering, what's, if not a pure cost calculation, how do we think about time of use rates going forward?
Well, traditionally, they have been a pure cost calculation, and what's been happening with that cost calculation, in fact, PG&E's time periods have been shifting. You're seeing the peak period shifting from the middle of the day when you have the price impacts of the duck curve into the evening. And so the time of use rates for the state are, across the state are responding to those price shifts. And so if we update our time of use rates or do a targeted time of use rate program in the next few years, we'd absolutely update our time periods and make sure they're aligned with the prices we're seeing in the wholesale market.
But it's
I don't know for sure that I
it's still
answered your
price
question
driven
fully.
rather than, for example, I guess my question is, could we include a cost of carbon in the calculation that may or may not be reflected in the wholesale marketplace at present, but that we, being Palo Alto, like to be carbon sensitive? Is that a possibility to include in our time of use rates?
So it's an interesting question. So on the one hand, we have, to some extent, a carbon price signal is actually built into the prices because generators.
The cap and trade?
Yeah, because of cap and trade. Now, I understand also that that's not necessarily the carbon price that reflects the long-term impact of carbon on the environment. So it's something that we can look at when we take a look at time of use rates. The one barrier that we regularly face is that rates have to reflect the cost of service, and so if there isn't a direct carbon cost to us, we'd have to look carefully at if we could include a carbon price signal. What might also be effective, and I think we've talked about this, is messaging to consumers about what time of day is most effective if they want to save carbon, and particularly if we're able to target the consumers who are going to be most responsive to that, who have the most environmental consciousness. That might be another avenue that we can pursue. But yeah, it's something that we're going to have to take a look at as we consider time of use rates.
My other comment on customer retail, thank you, by the way. My other comment on customer retail rate design is exploring the idea of fixed monthly utility bill discounts for homes with electric vehicles using low carbon fuel standard funds. I've been very pleased with our policies in the past that are not incentivizing EVs for single family homes, but rather really focusing on multifamily and workplace, and the sort of removing friction for non-single family home customers. And so I just want to express a personal lack of interest in providing extra incentives for a population that I think we've previously identified is already well served with current policies and discounts. Let's see. Somebody wants to jump in, I'll
Can I just
go with my
add
next thought.
on that one? You know, I think the idea of having a portfolio of options, so there are people for whom having predictable rates is really important, okay? And the idea of using rates as incentives and triggers to get people to change their behavior so that it serves sort of the greater good of what you're trying to achieve is a way to do that. And so if someone really cares about the carbon impact, that they can choose a rate that allows them to do that, that it doesn't necessarily have to be the cheapest, okay? And I think that that as we look at this, if we can do it in a more comprehensive way and use pricing incentives for situations where we think that will be persuasive for those people to do something that we need them to do for some reason. But it's just, you know, there's no magic in a particular hour unless you're going to get somebody to do something differently. So where you have situations where people are a natural winner, you know, and you put them on a time of use rate where they benefit, well, that really doesn't do anything for the community or the utility. Okay, so it's only where we get somebody to do something differently. And I think to the point about the EV rate with, you know, I think if there's a way to get other money to use to offset costs, that's something that we should look at creatively. Whether that happens to be the particular application for it, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case or not. But I do know that there are people who really like to have it predictable, particularly if they're on a fixed income. So since we do have a lot of retired people in town, that's an audience that tends to be very interested in that. So anyway, so I just think we just need a more nuanced look at how we're using price signals and how we use the interval meters to be able to allow people to choose a program that is more appropriate for them.
Shiva, the slides you just presented seem to be a subset of the bigger topics, scope of topics listed in Exhibit A that have been talked about before. Is that just because you're summarizing things for the meeting, or because what you presented in the slides tonight are what the focus is going to be for the next year?
What we presented is kind of the focus. There were broader topics, but we kind of were able to fit it into existing. For example, there was a section on forecasting as a area of focus, but that is kind of spreads across all these aspects of it.
Yeah.
So we kind of removed that. There was a area on staff development and industry collaboration. That's kind of what we do routinely. So we kind of shrunk it, so we made it into 5, which is kind of the major work areas where it interacts with the public and the community. So anything which we did do internally, which was earlier called out, we've eliminated that as an area of activity.
Okay, so one thing I think ought to be considered in there is charging networks and the long-term strategy on that. We're going to want to be able to have insight into what's going on, to apply demand response, maybe eventually vehicle to grid. And so the networks that are going in now ought to be future-proofed for those applications. Because that'll be a big part of our load and a really big opportunity for distributed energy resources. So that'd be my advice, to be include that in what we're doing right now. Certainly don't object to you doing rate design studies and the like. My own feeling is that providing discounts for going all electric or for the EVs aren't necessarily going to change behavior, and people use more energy. If it's meaningful to them, they'll just use more energy or more electricity. I think you're going to get, if the goal is to reduce fossil fuels and increase the carbon neutral use of our carbon neutral resources, I think other things that facilitate use of EVs, to Lisa's point, how you handle it from multifamily dwellings, and what we can do in the charging networks would have more impact than giving discounts to Tesla owners.
Right. Okay, point well taken. Just a couple of
Yeah, please.
a couple of thoughts. The reason we talked about giving a discount for fixed dollar per month discount on residential homes was we thought that might be lots of customers call when they go with the EV saying, hey, we don't have any incentive like PG&E does. So we struggled to answer that question. The main question, so we said the committee has decided to focus on multifamily and mixed use to channel those funds. So that's one customer ask, and the other one also from a distribution perspective. So to the extent we know so currently we do not know where these vehicles are registered. So to qualify for these, they'll have to register with us. And so that's a mechanism for them to proactively register with us to receive that. So that's kind of the thinking, and something which we can do with our existing billing system. We don't have the time of use or the time differential rates we cannot offer. So that's one. On the network aspect of it, we struggle with that because the network charges tend to be more expensive. So for example, for this multifamily home EV charging program, which we're trying to promote, there was a thought that we should mandate network charges, but we say we leave it to the...
Mandate what charge?
Smart chargers, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Network
yeah.
Smart chargers. But those are much more expensive. So we're kind of not requiring, we're providing incentives for charging infrastructure to be in place, but it's up to the multifamily dwelling to decide whether they want to put a smart charger or a dumb charger because it's cost effective. So there's a trade-off there, and so you may see many of the multifamily homes picking a dumb charger as opposed to a network charger, and we are not providing any additional incentives if they put a smart charger.
All right, well, we can talk more about that offline, but I would think it should be an area of focus for the studies, including what kind of incentives would change the behavior on that. Costs are coming down for smart chargers, so forth, and the other benefits to the landlords of doing it that way. So you can portion charge to the vehicle owner instead of just to the building.
Right.
But it's a topic that's worth study in the scope of your studies on that. So if I look at, please.
I was going to say, I think they're actually, I think the comments on EVs are identifying that there's probably a missing piece to our overview here. We do have a whole action plan around the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, specifically focused on EVs, and I think we should be summarizing that here. The primary focus of that work plan right now has been to expand the public charging network and to reduce barriers to more installation of private chargers. And utilities, public works, the whole city is focused on that. And I think collecting feedback from the UAC on our priorities in the EV section of the SCAP, I think is going to be important going forward. So we'll include that in future updates, and we'll include that feedback that you're we'll include that feedback that you're passing on when we have our next discussions with the EV SCAP team.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. My other comment is, it's not stated, but it's probably in your minds or in your internal discussions, but if you look out 5 to 7 years or more, we want an environment where you have insight into all these resources, you can control them for demand response, maybe bid things into the market depending on market pricing and the like. And it'd be nice if the statement of what's going on in the next few years is put in context of that longer-term goal on that in a little more explanatory way so people understand the importance of that. I know you're thinking about it all, but it's just worth expostulating. So other comments, discussions?
I didn't really have any additions. I'm looking forward to, there are a number of items on here that you're planning to discuss that I'm looking forward to discussing, but I understand this is not the time and place to do that. You're going to bring these items up to us as you discuss it.
Actually, we would love to hear your feedback on any of these items, because it'll actually help us to anticipate some of those issues or concerns as we bring these items back. So we would
Well,
love
I
to hear
just,
your feedback.
I was not sure, you're talking about evaluating a standardized policy for a connection fee for residential customers for electrical panels larger than 200 volts. Who are those customers, and what are we trying to accomplish there?
Sure. Yeah, as homes electrify, become all-electric homes, we think at certain instances 200 amp connection would not be sufficient. And the current rate structure is such that it's a standard fee up to 200 amps. If it's more than 200 amps, it's a engineering study has to be done, and the cost can vary anywhere from $695 to $15,000, depending on whether that incremental amperage requires a transformer upgrade on our part. So that provides that results in a lot of cost uncertainty for customers who are going all electric. Typically, a small home going all electric can manage with 200 amps, but two vehicles, relatively a medium-sized home with all electric appliances, 200 amps may not be sufficient. So we are trying to provide greater certainty, say another tier of, even for 400 amps, you know with certainty your cost, what it's going to be, as opposed to based on estimates. So that's what that's trying to do.
Okay, so this is another way of trying to incentivize people to electrify.
Or remove the uncertainty around electrifying.
Right, without establishing a separate rate for that, but make it more possible for people to do that.
Correct, at a known rate as opposed to an unknown
Right.
rate.
And then there was similarly discussion about the potential to integrate smart inverter capabilities into the city's distribution system, and I'm interested in learning more about what that would be and what advantages we would get from that.
Okay.
But again, maybe this is not the time.
Yeah.
Yes. We have an update on that?
Yeah. So one area we are focusing on, the inverters currently have a power factor of 1, which means our power factor of the rest of our system tends to deteriorate. So we are thinking of asking, as part of the permitting process, to require the inverters to inject some of the capacitive power into the system. So that's one area, one particular area we are focusing on. The other is in very warm days when solar is producing at full throttle and the induction motors are running, our power factor deteriorates. So can we ask on the inverters to provide the capacitive power required? So that's one area. Then there are a few other areas we're looking at.
So that would be changing the kind of the specifications required for installing solar systems?
Correct. Inverter settings, yeah.
Thank you.
It strikes me that this is part of a larger conversation that we need to have about, you have a municipal utility and everybody is getting benefits from it, and everybody is paying into the system. And one of the things that happens with distributed energy resources is that you've got people other than the city, entities other than the city, making an investment and getting the benefits, okay? And so it might be that there's somebody who makes an investment and the other citizens enjoy the benefit, or it may be that it just costs the other citizens more. And so I think in terms of, and I'm not just picking on you because I think that this is a hard thing to do, but I think what has been missing in a lot of the conversations is looking at, who wins and who loses in this. And I think it relates to things like undergrounding, or if we have one neighborhood where, every home had 2 Teslas, which is like putting more houses on the street, or if we electrify houses, then that's going to put more demands on the system. We're going to need bigger transformers. We're going to need more things. I think that the way the variables go, we've got to look at it in a different way than it's been done historically. And, I know that that's complicated, but I think that the way we frame it and frame the discussion needs to include that, because it's who pays and who gets the benefits are not going to be clean anymore. It's going to be very variable. So, if the smart inverter is such that the city can control it, so that's one of the things that APS has been working on, was their ability to manage the inverters so that they can sort of turn it up or down or dial it up and down as they need to support the wider community. Then there's a community value. If it only benefits the person whose house or building it's on, then it doesn't do anything for them. And I think that's one of the things that we need to figure out how to deal with.
So, I think you're hitting on an important point, and I just want to make sure that I'm getting it accurately. So, I think you're covering a wide range of potential cost-benefit mismatches, but one of the broadest examples is that the folks who are buying electric vehicles and putting solar panels on the system and possibly electrifying and creating more, not only demands, but also infrastructure investments that those folks may not necessarily be paying. They may be imposing costs on the entire rest of the city, and there's a potential transfer there to think about. And I think that's a really important point, something we need to think about especially as we move into our next rate studies.
And I think when you're looking at it in the state context of reflecting cost of service, I think that's where it comes in. And it may be that there's a different way to look at demand charges so that they're done in a way that's proportional. So it's not done in the way of, I'm going to take your worst case one day a month as the way I'm going to do the plan, but rather, if I'm guaranteeing you a particular level of service because you have a gigantic house and 4 EVs and all these other things, that the cost to serve you is different than somebody who lives in a tiny house. And so I think in part of the rate design problem is how you look at demand charges. I think that has to be part of the context so that you're not doing cross subsidies from lower income people to higher income people who want to buy toys. So. All right.
Sorry, just a few more comments about the takeaways from the survey, because there were, for me, multiple instances where I think the actions were sound, but the reasoning of how to get to the actions, I just wanted to make some comments on. Starting with energy storage, the statement that energy storage systems offer only minimal GHG reduction potential is not at all how I would put it, that storage systems offer enormous GHG reduction potential, but at their current price points are not feasible. And, I just think it's important to get that one right. So that said, the fact that staff will continue to work with customers who are interested is great, and that the value of storage systems will be continually reevaluated until hopefully at some point they are more feasible from a price standpoint. And again, on the heat pump water heaters, as an example, right now I'm not sure they make a lot of sense. If we had cheap storage someday, they would make a lot of sense from a greenhouse gas perspective. So I think the right course of action for the time being is to continue to remove barriers and help people who want them, but not to push them super aggressively. Because in the present day, I'm not sure it makes any difference at all on our greenhouse gas footprint. On smart appliances, I agree with Vice Chair Schwartz that power strips and smart lights aren't really DERs, they're just energy efficiency, and they're a fine idea, and rebates are a fine thing. And then on customer awareness of our carbon neutral electricity supply, again, agree, there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. just want to indicate my support for staff investigating if more nuanced messaging may be warranted, as well as not just messaging, but at some point for the city to consider whether our current accounting system is enough for our own goals, or if we want to redefine what we mean to be more of a real-time balancing act, even if it means we can no longer say we're at 100%, but just set ourselves a different target.
It's not reflected on the rolling calendar yet, but we'll be having those conversations within the next 6 months. We'll be working on it over the next few months, but it won't come to you until April, May, or June, so.
That's great, thanks.
Hi, one question which I think is quick. Do you have any sense of VMware's smaller microgrid project, what the timing is, and is it on schedule so far?
The small one, I think they are hoping to complete it before the end of the year.
Oh, great. And are they willing to share that with other commercial customers and be open?
They're
That's
motivated
great.
to kind of spread the story.
Great, right, that's exciting. And then the second, having the benefit of having read today the charter of the UAC, one of the things I noted was to even take action if we think there's something we believe should be changed at a legislative level. And so as we look at the time of use and limitations that we have right now in billing, I would just ask that the staff consider whether there is something that is a barrier at the state constitutional or statutory level that maybe we want to start talking about in Sacramento that gives us the flexibility to meet the goals that the state has already expressed as well. And then,
You're referring to the state constitutional provisions added by Prop 26?
yeah,
COSA provisions and
Yeah,
how
the
they
ones that
interfere
limit
with.
us from, the ones that
Yeah.
create
right,
a
and
lot
how
of
they
limitations on
prohibit
what we
us
can do with price.
from varying
yeah,
price
pricing.
incentives,
Yeah.
right? Or,
Okay,
yeah.
yep. Yes, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that periodically that comes up as a barrier to all kinds of innovative programs we
Yep.
might otherwise put in place. And with California increasing its goals in terms of lowering greenhouse gas emissions, maybe it is time to revisit those.
I had the same point. Now, last month was when we approved the legislative guidance, but that's, I think it's a good point to add.
Yes.
To that.
We'll note that. I just wanted to make sure I had it right, that was all.
Yeah, and then also on that, since I noticed that we're talking about 2023 or 2024 when we'll actually be able to use AMI feedback, that it would be, maybe as part of this other conversation with the legislature, but it'd be nice to be being creative about what we can do in the interim when we don't have the benefit of that information to incentivize behavior, whether it's based on, communication with customers or some other kind of price incentive or rebates of some sort.
Did you put this in so we could talk about it?
I think we delivered those at places, and you should be able to, it's relevant to the topics we're talking about today. If you have anything you want us to put up on the screen, we have those available.
So one of the things that got added to our packages is a couple of slides from this report that I worked on. And so I just want to very quickly just hit on a couple of things. So the first one, slide, page 8 in it, the first one, social values are valid reasons to expand availability. I'll wait till Jonathan gets it up, just so for the people in the room who don't.
There, along the right side, second one down.
So what I think the point is here on this one is that and this was written as a document, I didn't get a chance to make slides for for this purpose. But the point is that having solar resources visible so people can see them and take pride in having them in their community, it makes it a lot more meaningful for people than something that's hundreds of miles away that they're not going to see. And so that's really a value. And then it also, depending on where they're placed, can do a lot in terms of resilience and taking land that maybe is polluted or something that was a Superfund site and doing something with it where it can add value. So I think that's one of the things that's really important. And then if you can just go past the next one, I think the point is that community solar right now is a very small thing, and that we've invested in, the large-scale solar, which I think is appropriate. So the Marcus Garvey Village, which is in Brooklyn, is an example of a building. So this was a low-income housing development, but it's an example where a lot of the different technologies, DER technologies, have been grouped together. And the reason why the utility was willing to help pay for this to happen was it was an avoided cost of having to invest $1.2 billion in another substation. So it's the kind of example of something that we may choose to support, either a public building or to do something where we experiment with technologies and put them together, because there's a locational value of what we're doing. So it isn't just necessarily the benefit to going to one building or one group of people, but rather what you can learn and do with it. And then if you can go to the Worcester Regional Transit Authority one. So this is one where they're looking at it, where they're trying to do electric buses, and they're trying to basically take solar on this large building and use it to charge the buses that can then have a value in terms of transit and other things. And again, the purpose of this particular project is to sort of generate some revenue to support like bus passes for low-income consumers. So that's actually something that we actually have a population in Palo Alto that could benefit, maybe students or things like that we could make it easier. And so I guess being part of a regional solution as part of that. And then so then if you look at this one, so using it as resilience insurance, so part of why, again, what makes sense for community solar is when there's some larger value. So if you can get it so you can set up charging stations that allow people to charge during the day when we have the excess of solar, and you can do some things that again are locally based. Excuse me, then there is a locational value and a value that we get beyond just having community solar. And because the laws in California with the CEC requirement are going to be that we have to, any new construction has to either have solar on the rooftop or be part of or buy into a community solar installation. That may be another thing that if we see where we can set these things up and they make sense and there's some value, that we have places already ready, so then people can buy a subscription in and take over some of the cost of doing it. So I think that these are really examples for that. And then again, I'm just trying to see if there's one. So if you go to page, what's listed as 63, so keep going to that one. So again, as you look at this intersection between community solar service and regulatory policies, I think that's worth people taking a look at on offline and sort of seeing that there are impacts on different aspects of it if you do different kinds of service programs, whether they're energy efficiency or pricing or discounts or payment arrangements or arrearage management. I realize arrearage management is probably a relatively minor problem here, but it's something to be considered. And so I just think that this is one of the areas where we have an opportunity to be creative and to be leaders in the state of California about how to do these things effectively. So even though, as we've noted, it's not the cheapest way to get solar, it has other values that are important. So I just...
All right. Thanks, Judith. And thank you for including that, those materials in the packages today. Any other comments from Commission members on the scope of the work that's going to be the focus in the next few years? Back to Shiva's presentation. All right, we've given you some comments, and we reserve the right to give you more thoughts later.
Yeah, we just wanted to thank the commission for all of these comments. I think this is really helpful to us as we move forward. And, again, if you think of anything as you walk out or later on, please feel free to reach out to us. We're working on all these topics over the next few months, and any feedback we get from you is helpful.
Okay, appreciate that. All right, so we'll move on to our next agenda item, and we have 2 citizen comments for this. So, David Weiss, would you like to, you still here? There we go.
Hi. My name is David Weiss.
Oh, is the microphone on there? We should make sure we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I'm a resident here, and I happen to be an electrical engineer who designed fiber optics 2.5 decades ago. And I don't understand why I don't have fiber optics. People are asking me, friends from all over the world, how come you don't have in Palo Alto, the birthplace of Silicon Valley, high-tech communication? Somebody from Latin America in a small town just a week ago told me, I have fiber optics in my home. And I would like to know the answer, why not? I know that fiber optics is the answer for communication, for future communication. And I cannot get an answer that rings a bell to my ears. I would like to know why and when will we have?
Okay. Well, that's a good statement that a lot of people share that sentiment or share that question. We can't really discuss yours right now, but
And what should I answer when someone is asking me such a question?
I guess the short answer is the city's working on plans for fiber to the node, and we'll see about from there, but that it would be the next step. There's still more analysis to be done, and it's been going slower than many people in the community would like. But
And I meant FTTP.
yeah, I understand. I understand, but that would be a second stage as they're thinking about it now. Yeah. So, anyways,
In our lifetime, in my lifetime?
yeah. Appreciate your comment, shared by a lot of people, that sentiment. All right. The Jeff Hoyle, please.
Okay, this may be the last time I'll be able to say this, so I'm a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee on FTTP and wireless, but I'm speaking just for myself. I think it was a mistake for staff to consider sunsetting, terminating the CAC. It has a reasonable role. It's been trying to play the role in spite of the fact that 5 of its meetings were canceled last year. But I think staff's memo emphasizes that UAC has a role to play too. And especially if CAC becomes absent, it'll become clear that UAC is the only oversight entity on this subject. And so be prepared to do your best. The original option 2 that council voted for on August 21st, 2017 included an option for designing an entire fiber to the premises network. As far as I can see, reading just this 4-page memo that you're considering this evening, staff may be thinking of changing the scope so that it doesn't include that option. I think that would be a disaster. The only good thing I thought could possibly come from FTTN was the FTTP part.
Was what?
Sorry, the FTTP option part.
Yeah.
Another question is, staff is proposing, apparently staff thinks that none of the bids that they got for its original RFP were good enough, and so it wants to write the RFP over again. What I'm concerned about is that the public doesn't get to find out why none of the bids were satisfactory and may not be able to watch how staff is proposing to write it again. And so there may be an information blackout all the way until staff comes back and gets bids from the altered RFP and says, this is the one we want. So between August 21st, 2017 and now, a lot of time has elapsed. Potentially a lot more time can elapse in the future before we get any information back to the public on what should happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Herb, are you ready to speak? Thank you.
Chair Danaher, Commissioners, and Mayor Filseth, as in the past, mayors are liaisons. They're only prohibited from being on either the Finance Committee or the Policy and Services and can substitute for any of those members as needed. I sent you a letter. It was today, which means staff had an opportunity to make copies for the public at places because it was so late, but I will be sending copies to CAC members and the council as well. I believe you should exercise your appropriate role under the municipal code and make a recommendation to the council as an action item. This has not been agendized as an action item, so therefore you should have one at your next meeting, and you can simply track the language of this agenda item and substitute for the feedback language, commission recommendation to council regarding the city's fiber optic, wireless, and advanced meter infrastructure planning. The responses to the current RFP were due on June 28th. Staff has been keeping them for over 6 months and has suggested issuing a new RFP. But staff is not the awarding authority for a contract of this dollar amount. The city council is. And it's the city council that makes the decision of whether to reject all those bids or to award a bid. And because of your responsibilities, it does so upon your recommendation. So when this is an action item, staff should bring back their proposal and you make a recommendation to the council of what to do about the RFP responses. It would seem that action item would be more appropriate to, to give you details of what to say, what to include, but just to go back in history, this has been going on for 20 years, and there have been times where it was the city council that approved the content of the request for proposal, and I believe it's time to do that again. The issue with the Citizens Advisory Committee, as I've given you some documentation in my letter, there seems to be, at least with former employee Jonathan Reichenthal in the Information Technology Department, which was responsible for convening the Citizens Advisory Committee meetings, of holding out still the hope of being a basis for Google to do its latest idea of wireless to the home, and have no idea whether what is being designed is to do that. It's being presented as a fiber to the node, and then we'll take some future step. So that's another reason why it should be the city council that should be reviewing the draft RFP and making a decision as to what the request for proposal should be. But you can't do that this evening because it's not an action item. So that's another reason for making it an action meeting, action agenda item. As far as the proposal, I believe the part of it that's sort of a poison pill is when we talk about ubiquity. Ubiquitous meaning everybody gets connected. And if you then say, well, how can you justify that? Well, you say it's because it's for the meter reading. But if you're talking about citizens and businesses using a connection to the internet for other things, that's not a viable proposal. The correct thing would be you pass every address and give everybody the opportunity to connect on the same basis. You're essentially designing something to fail if you're saying everyone has to be connected for everything. And you're also delaying it to fail if you try to have standards and goals that a profit-making company would have. The city should look at it as a service to residents and design it on that basis and with that criteria, rather than saying it's a private business or an initial public offering, or it's something to make a certain rate of return. And I think those kinds of things are going to be fleshed out more on an action item agenda when everyone will have an opportunity to see what staff's proposing and asking for your recommendation to the council on when that appears on your agenda in the future and hopefully at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Herb. All right. Well, Herb is correct. This is agendized as a feedback or discussion, not as an action item. And Dave, you want to begin with, or whichever one of you, Dean?
So, tonight, we're asking a request for some feedback from the board commissioners regarding the following two staff recommendations, as you see on the wireless advanced metering infrastructure. And that is to reissue the fiber to the node RFP to expedite this network design advanced metering infrastructure. So we're really considering reissuing this fiber request to expedite the network planning and the construction to better align to the business cases and the AMI implementation. And I think the thing is that what we found is that we really only found one qualified responder for the existing RFP that we put out today. And that vendor may not be that interested at this period of time. And so we've had long deliberations with staff, including legal and purchasing staff, and recommending this reissuing. And the main reason for this is that if this one vendor decides that they want to bid on the existing RFP today, then at that point, they will not be able to bid for any of the new design work or any of the construction management, because the feeling is, from a legal standpoint, is that this is an advantage to them, because they would be doing the business plan, they'd be looking at some of the ordinances that we've been talking about, and so the feeling is, from legal's perspective and also from purchasing, is that they would be counted out and they would not be able to look at the bigger picture of as we move forward with this RFP. One of the things that was mentioned, that there was a design that was in this RFP, but the design was a very high level design. There was no detailed design. It was never going to get down to the nodes. It was going to be basically a high level portion of it. So as we were thinking through this whole process, that though we still need to look at the whole business case, but this may delay the RFP portion of it. But we think that reissuing it will accelerate the engineering design and cost. So looking at the construction. So one of the things that we were hoping that we were going to be able to do in the RFP was that we were going to take that high level design and we were going to make it a full design. That's what we were asking for from a legal perspective. And they said basically is that you can take anything out of the RFP, but you cannot put anything back into the RFP additional. And the reason for that is that when the RFP went out, there was only 6 vendors that applied for it at that period of time and put bids in for it. So now if you add this full design, there might have been other folks that would have taken that portion of it on. So we could not add anything to the existing RFP. And so, as I mentioned, that we know that there will be a delay. but we think that it will accelerate at the very end portion of it, because we would go through this RFP, and then we would have to reissue another RFP for a full design. It's going to take more time. So those are some of the reasons. So the overall goal to leverage this, extending the fiber network into the neighborhood with the support of the AMI and other city initiatives such as smart cities applications and wireless communications. And so that's kind of the approach that we took. So staff's feeling is that we focus our efforts in expanding the fiber network and take that approach to look at the essential city. There's some functions from emergency preparedness as well as some IT perspectives. Looking at this infrastructure as we move forward. And then the last thing is that we think that UAC will provide that broader viewing of, because we've been talking so much about AMI. AMI is going to get us out to the node, so it'd be FTTEN, and then extend that out to where these collectors will have to be, because we need to put collectors up for the AMI portion of it. Now, there's two ways of looking at it from the collector portions of it, is that you can use a cellular commercial type of device that you can hook the collectors up to, or you can use fiber.
Sorry, what's a collector?
Oh, I'm sorry. So as you launch your AMI and you put your meters in there, the meters hop from a water meter to a gas meter to electric meter, and then they go on to the next house and on to the next house. And then these collectors are actually collecting all that data for the billing purposes. It's almost just like a radio, basically, in a transmitter. So as the radios are in the meters, this thing collects all that data, and that's what gets pushed back into the CIS piece, so from the billing aspect of it. So that's what the collectors are. So you can do it, you can hook it up in two different directions. You can hook it up with cellular, or you can do fiber. So we're thinking that as we went through to council to approve the AMI concept back here in November, that we would then, at that point, since we were talking to some of the vendors that went for this RFP, that it probably would make more sense to maybe use some of the fiber that we've already put in there. Drop larger, bigger bundles of fiber at the node, so that at that period of time, we can expand it and possibly then get to FTTN, or to the premise, sorry, FTTP, to the premise that would be kind of the long-term portion of it. But it would expedite getting fiber out into the neighborhoods. And then the last part of it is that on the idea of taking the Citizen Advisory Committee.
I'll tell you what, let's treat that one separately,
Okay.
just to keep it easier. So I had the benefit of talking with you about the first item last week, and just to summarize, the reasons for reissuing would be we may not have any qualified vendors to do the first one. Secondly, expanding the scope to include the detailed study would actually accelerate the time in which we have the whole set of information, so it would not be a delay. Maybe we should have started out that way. Third, it might cause more vendors to bid on this. And fourth, and I think incidentally to this, is if we're reissuing, we could include the AMI.
Yes.
No, it's not as important as the other items. Does anybody feel that well, actually, let's address Herb's question. This is all about fiber to the node. So why don't we talk a little bit about why the scope of this doesn't include fiber to the premises?
So I think right now is that, if we do go back out and we actually put this take out the high-level design portion of it and get more of the detailed design portion of it, then at that point we would look at nodes throughout the neighborhoods for the potential that, and then as I said, we would look at where it made sense to go to the node, which is what we went to council with, and we would drop large amounts of fiber at that one node. Then at that point, you could then move it further into more nodes within the neighborhoods so that you could possibly, a long-term goal would be to serve the customers and the residents of Palo Alto.
So I'll make sure I understood. As you're thinking of it now, you'd be asking for more detail on the detail of the fiber to the node, but not necessarily enough to cover all the neighborhoods and all the houses?
I think what we would do is we would ask for that detail. We're thinking that, maybe Jim Fleming can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're thinking maybe about 100 nodes? So 80 to 90 nodes would probably take care of the whole city. So if we would drop one node in one neighborhood, then the future portion of it, and this design would show that future of those 85 to 100 nodes throughout the city. So we wouldn't have to go back out for another design at that period of time. So the idea is to get a full detail for every street, everything that we have in the city today, and that would be the design. And then included in that would also be the design to spur off going to these collectors that we would need for the AMI
Okay.
portion.
Okay, but what about, so the question that Herb raised is, fine, we get the design for the 90 nodes or whatever, when do we talk about connecting to the premises or doing the study on that?
Well, I think one of the things that we would still include back into this new RFP was, some of the things that we looked at in the past that what's in this RFP today was to look at, some of the funding plans, identify the potential of, some of the ordinances that we would have to think about, like that dig once. We talked about, the one-touch make-ready on the pole side. We also talked about possibly looking at the micro-trenching portion of it. So all of that still in the business plan would still be within this RFP. So I think then at that point, council would have to make a determination then at that point from the business plan does that make the most sense for us then at that period of time? Because if you remember, when we went to council back at the very beginning, we gave them 3 options, as we gave those 3 options to you. One was to go ahead and look for funding to build out 100% of it, which was in the tune of $50 to $75 million. The second one was to build it to the node. And the third thing was kind of phase it out at this period of time and look for a third-party vendor. So council decided, as well as you all did, was to look at building to the node.
Okay.
And then, we would build then at that point. So I think it's an open-end question about when do we look at what that larger piece is. And I think the thing is that if we reissue this and we get this full design portion of it, we'll have a better understanding. From when CTC came in here some years ago, you remember if they did the business plan, that's where that dollar amount come. So I think the thing is that we could relook at that portion of it and see what those true costs would look at that period of time.
Okay, so to recapture, it's about fiber to the node, but you expect it's going to cover some of the details about to the premises?
Yes.
What the options might be, cost, technology, that sort of, okay, very good.
Yes.
Thank you. So, commission members, any discussion from people on this? Or do we just want to encourage staff to bring back an action item? What comments?
What's that?
I think I'm still a little confused about how the RFP covers fiber to the premises with this new discussion proposal.
I think the near-term focus is more on the fiber to the node network, but then there will still be a part of the RFP that will show that there's flexibility or scalability to reach out to the fiber to the premise. In regards to the detailed design of that section, we're not sure yet. I think we're still evaluating that piece. So it depends on how much it will cost and how long it will take to do all that design work for the fiber to the premise. But the short-term goal is definitely fiber to the node with the scalability to expand out further. But we're not exactly sure how detailed that second phase will be. So it's more of like an incremental approach for now.
So I think that if it goes to if they do the study to the node, then that gives us a business case that's larger than just fiber to the premises. So the business case for doing it, of why it might be valuable to the investment of AMI, lets us sort of get greater value for that. And then the incremental piece that has to go to the household to do something else can be put in this other context. And then you can compare it to, do we just use a Wi-Fi or a
Right.
cellular system to bring that last piece of data back, or do we do it via fiber? Then that puts it in a context also that it's more just, so that's more than just, are you using it for some entertainment purposes or things like that? It's you're now looking at it at this other infrastructure level. So I think that when we had the conversation about it, that was why we thought going out and adjusting the RFP so we could handle that made more sense, because then there's more that you can bundle in with it.
And the second RFP will also give us a second cost estimate, an actual better cost estimate of the fiber to the premise network as well. So it'll be a cost estimate for both fiber to the node and fiber to the premise.
Okay, so sorry, but I just want to make sure, because I've struggled with this in the past, this idea of an RFP to fiber to the node and how that gets us information about fiber to the premises. So in addition to putting in detail about AMI, we're also talking about adding detail in terms of additional nodes and some information in the RFP responses that will give us a sense of the viability, the economics of fiber to the premises, and perhaps maybe this is going too far. Is there any sense of security trade-offs between fiber to AMI and fiber back to the what are
To the collectors?
To the collectors, right, versus Wi-Fi or 5G or whatever it's going to be?
Well, I think that that's what the future looks like. I mean, I think the thing is, from a security standpoint, the thing is that, you know, I mean, if you're using a commercial type of cellular that's just going to go up in the cloud, there's always that potential portion of it. You know, we'll be able to own and operate that security portion of it if it was fiber to those collectors. That would go right back to the CIS, so there's some advantages in that area. And I think the thing is that incrementally getting it out to the node, like I say, we would drop large amounts of fiber, and then you can splice from that one node that we designed to get to the collectors as well, but then at that point you could take it further into the neighborhoods. So you could drop more nodes to get these other nodes that we would need throughout the city.
So I guess what you'd be proposing is that you would come back to us with a redesigned RFP, cover the elements you've talked about, and then ask for our recommendation.
I think the next step would be actually is that we'd have to go to council right now. Our next steps would be is to take this to let them know that we're going to cancel, we want to reissue the RFP. And then, once we do that, then come back with the RFP back.
So the council's action would be to withdraw the current one.
Right, because their recommendation to us was to go to the node. And now, you know, we want to add the design phase as well as we want to push to the AMI portion of it. So we think that the best way is to actually go to council, because they may feel differently. They may just say, you know what, we want to keep the design, the RFP the way it is, and we may have to reissue. We don't know that for a fact. Like I said, it sounds like the only viable one out of the 6.
So if the council agrees to withdraw it, then you go through,
Right.
redraft the RFP, comes back to us, and
Right.
comes back to the council again.
Exactly.
Okay. So perhaps it should have been agendized as an action item if you want a recommendation on that, but it wasn't, so maybe
Right.
The discussion can reflect, I don't know how others feel, at a discussion. My feedback would be yes.
Thank you, Judith. My feedback would be yes, withdraw this and reissue the one that would have more value. But I don't know, others have feedback for that?
Well, I mean, my only comments are, it sounds like if we don't have many people who are interested in responding to the existing RFP and it doesn't cover everything we need, then there's really not much of a choice here. But it's very frustrating. We've been talking about this for a long time. We sent out an RFP. What can we do to be confident that if we do this again, A, we're going to send out an RFP that covers everything that we need it to cover, and that it's going to be more likely to attract bidders?
So we're pretty confident in that, and the reason for that is that we've spoken to other cities that are kind of in the same situation that we are about looking at creating an AMI system in their city portions of it, and they've been very successful in the cities of doing it the way that we think is now the right way, is to go with this full design portion of it, go to dropping a node, getting a full design portion of it, and from what we've found is that they've been pretty successful in getting multiple vendors that would bid on something like that.
All right, other feedback for
Yeah, sorry.
Please.
So correct me if I'm wrong, I'm still trying to understand just like what the old one was and what the difference is between the new RFP that you proposed to reissue. So the original RFP did not actually ask for a design, a detailed design of fiber to the node?
Not an engineering design, it's just a high level.
It only,
Conceptual.
a high-level design was given, and they were supposed to make a business case, or they were supposed to make a high-level fiber to the node design?
They were supposed to give business case and a high-level fiber to the node design, conceptual
Okay.
design. But what we're asking for now is an engineering design
Okay.
in addition.
Okay, my feedback would be 2 thumbs way up to an actual engineering design, and the more detail, the better, including out to collectors, if I've understood. There's sort of like, there's the nodes, and then there's the collectors, and then there's the premises. And I wonder if it's possible to include engineering design of fiber to the premises for one neighborhood or something like that. I wasn't actually at the UAC meeting when this came up, but I remember there being the suggestion, I think it was Commissioner Ballantyne, of trying to treat it as if we were going to actually pass the premises in a neighborhood, just to keep ourselves honest about what that would mean and what the implications, just so that that the design doesn't somehow, so that surfaces all the issues that might come up when we actually wanted to pass the premises.
Now, we are going to have an opportunity to comment. If the council agrees to withdraw the current RFP, we have an opportunity to comment on
What the new
the
one
reissue.
On the new
one.
RFP,
Okay,
yes.
Fair enough. So
that's
maybe now
correct.
is not the time for feedback like that. And yet the 4 tasks are listed out in the report. Is that the idea of private-public partnerships, are there examples of other cities that have done, I just feel like this is this like fantasy that we're going to get some private entity to sort of chip in and pay for this, but it feels like we end up wasting a lot of time hoping that that will happen. Is there a reason to believe a private partner will emerge that is helpful in some way?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think with the new engineering design, I think we will have more realistic expectations of what we can provide to the public-private partnerships. So I think that's one of the consultants that recommended to us, is why we should include the detailed design. We'll get better responses back from those partnerships, once they know what our design of the network is.
And would the vendors be saying, hey, we want to be your private partner, and here's our proposal for that? Or would the vendor be saying, here's a design and a business case, now go find a private partner to do this?
So one of the things that that's going to be in the RFP portion of it, just as it is in today's RFP, was that this vendor was going to help us look at potential third-party folks that would build that last mile, the connection point from the node into the neighborhoods. So we would definitely keep that into this RFP as well, so that they can help us with looking for that third party. Since, mostly that's what these vendors do, these firms, so we feel that, there might be an opportunity there.
Just set an expectation, there hasn't been that many successful private partnerships, private-public ones. Just
You said there have not been that many?
No.
Okay.
As you suspected.
Yeah.
All right. Enough feedback for now, from this point? Okay. Let's go on to this.
So this, on to the second one?
Yes.
Yeah. You want to take that, or do you want me to? So moving back to our second recommendation portion of it is then to look at, is to actually look at the USA to the UAC to assume the advisor role in the AMI implementation, the fiber and the wireless planning, and that we would then think about making that recommendation of sunsetting the citizen advisor group. But again, I got to be perfectly clear, is that, that would have to come from council. So the council was directed the city manager some time ago, 2013, to create the Citizens Advisors Group. But we think that at this period of time, that having the UAC that's going to oversee this large project from the AMI and then out to the node portion of it is that we think that it's the right time to have all of you advise us as we move forward with this portion of it. And then I think the thing is that the idea around was mostly just that since this was in your privy as a commission around the fiber piece, and as we move forward, we think that that's the best decision to be made at this time.
Well, I haven't had much insight into how the functioning of the CAC has been. It sounds like there were few meetings last year, or only 2, and those were directed by Jonathan Reichenhall. Was he the one that ran that process?
That is correct.
And you got it, department got value out of it over the years from the CAC.
Yeah, I think the thing is that if we go to, we definitely want to thank the Citizen Advisory Committee on some of the accomplishments pieces, and that was around to the fiber to the premise master plan, the wireless network plan, inputting regarding the co-build decisions with Google Fiber when we were thinking we were going to be working with Google. They inputted and requested the FTTP, the public-private partnership portions of it. And then, we also received great input for development of the RFP for the FTTN business case. So, there has been value. And I think the thing is that, like I say, with going to council and having a little bit more different of a direction of adding on to the AMI, that we think it's more of a utility perspective, that the commission should be the one that should be advising at this period of time.
Was the Citizen Advisory Committee more people with technical credentials than this group?
I think it was a mixed, wasn't it?
Probably mixed, okay.
How many people, I don't have a good sense of who is on that committee.
There's currently 8 members. I can read you their names if you're interested.
I guess it's more helpful to know their background. I'm sure their names if you know if they have any technical skills or other applicable experience.
Okay. Do you know the details?
There's a couple engineers.
Does Jim know?
I don't know the background.
Yeah, I don't know the background.
I can give you the names though, real quick.
Okay.
Like Jeff Hoyle, of course. And then we have also tonight we have Christine. Let's find the rest. Sorry. All right, the current members are Bob Harrington, Jeff Hoyle, Andrew Cowell, Don Lee, Oliver Matthey, Christine Moe, Andy Poggio, and Lauren Smith.
And how often are they scheduled to meet, and how often do they typically meet?
Generally, it's about once every other month, but we have canceled a couple last year, as Jeff had pointed out. And we rescheduled a couple as well.
Thanks.
Let me dive in here by saying it seems to me either we're going to have 2 advisors or 1, but we don't have any choice. I think we're going to have to weigh in on this no matter what. Can't tell you whether that means we ought to, but if the CAC's there, it's one level, but if we're the only ones providing advice, we're going to need a lot more on this than we've been receiving.
More attention. I think Jeff made that point as well. Yeah, and I don't have an opinion on, can't really insight on what's the most usefulness to the staff and to the city council. So I think rely on you to make that case. I guess my biggest concern, and we're a situation where the utility department has been understaffed and so many activities going on that this has languished somewhat over the last 3-4 years. We could all agree that. And so I'm most interested in whatever structure is going to allow us to help the department, accelerate the pace of analysis and decision-making on fiber. And so apart from that, I'm neutral on whether the CAC is very helpful to you or served its utility or whatnot, and have no opinion.
Just to add to that, I mean, it seems to me that one of the things we want to be sure is if there is going to be another RFP, that it really be what we want. And I think you indicated that the CAC's input to the last RFP was useful. And so I think it's important to consider, for you to consider whether they can provide useful input on the next iteration. Because while I'm constantly impressed by the expertise of my fellow commissioners here, I don't know that any of us would qualify as experts in the fiber area.
So the CAC does offer very valuable input, but the only reason, but it could delay the RFP is because of the feedback back and forth and scheduling meetings with them and getting their input in and reviewing the RFP. So that's the only hindrance.
It was frustrating. That last RFP went out so much later than planned.
Right.
And we received copies only at the very last minute.
Right. So a lot of coordination's involved since there's 8 folks on the committee.
All right.
I also think that, we would take like as I mentioned, is that we would take everything that was in the existing RFP, and it's really basically is to take out that high-level design portion of it, but just to add a full design. And then also do the construction and do the construction management piece. We will have to go out for another RFP for the actual construction work itself. We don't think that there's a vendor out there that could do all of that. Plus, we were advised by legal that it's not something that you'd want to put out there because, again, there's a distinct advantages knowing what the design looks like, and then also you know what your construction costs are going to go. So they're going to roll those costs together, and you're going to get a much higher cost. So it was pointed out to us that, if we get this high-level design portion of it, and then we do the construction management along with what we have today already in the RFP, is probably the best way to go out to putting an RFP together. And then, like I said, if it's accepted through council, then at that point, then when we get ready to build it, we would definitely put out another RFP. But that firm could help us since they would hold that contractor to the tasks of the design that they actually built for us with that.
So during the drought, we got at every meeting a little update on the water situation. Maybe we start doing that on the fiber, whether or not you keep the CAC going, but a little status report, even if it's only 60 seconds, so that it's in the record and,
We can definitely do that. And we also encourage the CAC to come attend UAC meetings and provide their input as well. So they're more than welcome to join us here and give their contributions.
I'm still a little confused what's driving the discussion now about sunsetting the CAC if they provided this valuable input. If what I'm hearing is the biggest challenge was the frustration of meeting and then the consequences of scheduling and delayed scheduling, because there may be some valuable historical knowledge with that group. And it seems to me, just as we have fixed meetings, there's a fixed meeting and whoever shows up, and if not every member of the CAC can participate in every meeting, I don't think that, if there's value in having their input, it seems a bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater if they're terminated completely because there's been some frustration. Now, if the value has been exhausted, I don't have insight into that, and I'm not getting a clear sense from you all tonight. But that would be my thought. If it's really more about the timing, there are other approaches. But if it's more than that, I would defer to you all.
I do have one thought, just thinking out loud. If the CAC's role was to advise staff and staff is no longer interested in, receiving that advice, I'm not sure. I don't have any insight into what happened in those meetings. But if it is sunsetted, I think, and as others have reflected here, it is a very technical area and we might not feel like we have the expertise, like I would be interested in learning from, the CAC. And I want, where my thoughts go is if we're really going to be diving into FDT and FTTP in the nearer term, if the UAC should consider setting up a subcommittee, and if maybe it would be appropriate for the subcommittee to find a way to interact with the CAC to tap into their expertise, and rather than having it be a body that advised staff, somebody that the UAC could learn from as we consider the, if, for example, if we're going to look at the RFP before it goes out instead of the CAC looking at the RFP before it goes out, then maybe there would be a way for us to draw on the expertise of the CAC. Just a thought.
So at one point, we did have a subcommittee on fiber for the UAC that Arnie and I were on. And so there's no reason that we couldn't have it again. The thing that I would wonder is that if now we're looking at this, one of the things that's changed is that now we're looking at it in the context of AMI, which we weren't doing that before, and it was on its own. So one of the questions that I'd have for staff is how much would it take, in your opinion, to bring the CAC up to speed on the broader issues of AMI and the other technologies that now are going to need to be considered as part of this, because that's a heavy lift on its own. And so is it more efficient to bring this group more up on fiber, and rather than trying to now have a second group that is also needs to understand AMI? And so I guess if you could maybe address that a little bit.
I think that's a good point. I think the thing is that, the CAC has been 100% looking at, FTPN or to the premise at that period of time, and now, we want to move in a whole different direction of looking at getting this system built so that when our CIS has been rebuilt and we're upgrading that portion of it, that we can actually launch in that period of time. I think that I've heard loud and clear from the commissioners that, we're way behind the times from where utilities are and from where, from an AMI standpoint. And I think the thing is that our staff's feeling is that what we want to do is we want to move quickly. We want to get fiber out to the neighborhoods, and we want to get to the AMI portions of it. Because if we wait another, CIS is supposed to be another probably 3 years at that period of time. So at that, if we're going to wait 3 more years for AMI, then it's going to take probably another 2 years on top of that to actually build the system out. So we're talking 5 years before we're able to even look at a customer as we move forward. So the idea is that our focus should be around, we think, our focus should be around building to the AMI. Again, also moving it forward so that we can get to the premise, but that's not the main focus. And I think that that's been the focus with the CAC, is that as we were thinking about this whole process, that's where we were going to be. And I think the thing is that we want to move quickly with moving forward with this to the AMI portion of it.
I'm going to suggest that we don't have too much more. Thank you again. After another year, I'll get around, learn it. My button is on. We don't really have too much more insight or to offer on that. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. We'll leave that to you and the council on that. And then with the commission's blessing, we'll move on to topics for potential future meetings. Oh,
Can I comment on this one? Right. So I don't think I'm going to say anything that hasn't been said already, but as I listen to the discussion and think about it, it seems to me that one way to look at this is to ask the basic question, has the CAC's mission been fulfilled, right? Because if the mission's been fulfilled, then that's when you would associate it with sunsetting the commission and thank everybody for what they've done. If it has not been fulfilled, then we're sort of going down a different path and saying, well, the UAC can take over the mission And then you have all these other questions about technical expertise and so forth, right? And one of the directions is, well, maybe the mission has changed, right, which is we now see fiber to the node as associated with the AMI rollout as opposed to fiber to the premises. So is the CAC's mission no longer needed because of that? And so then that's sort of it's sort of a different way of looking at it. Has the mission been fulfilled, right? But it seems to me that without offering an answer here, it seems to me like that's the crucial question. Has the mission been fulfilled, or is it no longer needed because of X, Y, Z reason? And I think, we ought to think about that, and that's probably how the council would think about it too.
I think the initial mission with the CAC was to develop a fiber to the master plan, and so that part has been completed. And whether or not we move to that right now, since we're moving directions to a fiber to the node, that's why I think we're switching back to the UAC.
I will add one more piece of feedback. When you present to the council, I think the CAC is an incidental part of this. The real issue is how does Palo Alto move forward expeditiously on analysis and decision-making? Because we sort of went sideways or stopped for a while because we thought Google might build out a system, but that was 3 years ago and or more. So now it's about how do we move forward. No, please.
Well, I was going to say that there's a piece of this you listen to, sort of the dialogue, and one of the arguments he says, well, we need to move faster. Okay, but I think we need to be a little bit careful there. You say, if the CAC's mission was critical to us getting the right answer, and it's not been fulfilled, right, then sunsetting the CAC in order to move faster, that's not necessarily a good idea, right? If the mission is critical, if the mission's not critical, right, then fine, right? But I think, we make sure we're doing it the right way.
It might be worth encouraging people who are on the CAC that one of them, or more than one of them, might want to run for, to apply to be a commissioner on the UAC and be part of it on that. And then if the city council feels that it's really important to have that expertise on the UAC, then you can pick one of those people to be part of it. And I think then those individuals would then be responsible for a broader set of issues, and they'd have to see this in a larger context instead of in a narrow focus. And I don't necessarily think that would be bad, because I think when you're looking at trade-offs among systems, you might make different decisions than if you're only looking at one.
And I think if the branch says that, well, actually the mission is still needed, right, but we want the UAC to take it over, then I think something like you just said is probably essential.
All right, on to next topics. I'm going to make the first suggestion because it relates to the discussion we just had. I think it'd be nice to have a presentation on the org structure of the department. Who's in what positions are unfilled, how many staff underneath fill in each of the departments, and a little bit more of what's going on, because I realize I don't have the understanding of that I should after several years on the commission. And when we talk about all that you have to accomplish, what isn't getting done and the like, having that picture would be very helpful.
So we actually we actually spoke about that this week because we know that after you and I and Judith had some conversations that we noticed that, the agenda is a little bit light at that period of time. So one of the things that we're bringing back next month is talking a little bit about the workforce itself and how the organization is structured, how many openings that we actually have, what some of our challenges are in filling some of those positions. So we were going to bring that back next month.
Excellent. And if you could include an org chart with that, with names, and great, that would be boxes. So other suggestions on topics for future meetings? AJ?
I'm interested in following up on the resiliency discussion, and I don't know what the plan now is for doing that or the time frame, but we'd like to make sure that that's moving forward.
We will reschedule something back up on that. I think that Debbie was planning on coming back, but we just haven't scheduled it yet. But it should be coming back within the next couple months, I would guess, and we'll make sure that it gets done.
So do we get to, like, if there are subcommittees that would be useful to have, do we get to have a discussion about that and ask city council to authorize them, or does city council have to magically come up with them?
In the past, the UAC has just made that decision.
So then so I think one of the discussion points should be, if we don't need the city council to direct it, then let's have a discussion about what might be some useful subcommittees. And again, there's no reason that a subcommittee can't reach out to experts in the community, whether it's people on the CAC or some other area about resilience or something like that. So that may be a way that we can tap into people who are knowledgeable from the community who are not necessarily going to be UAC members. So
we could
add
agenda that for next meeting.
Okay, that'd be great.
Formation of subcommittees.
All right. Other suggestions, please?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure the suggestion from last meeting about succession planning, which is in line with Mike's request about what the current status is, but I'd also like to see we know there are some current employees who will be leaving in the near or midterm, and just to be sure that that's part of the presentation as well.
Yeah, we're still trying to get a handle of all that right now. So we are gathering that information. Whether or not it'll be ready by next month, I'm not sure, but we'll give you what we have available. And then we can follow up with that later.
Thanks.
So I'm definitely worried about what this next year is going to bring to us. There's a potential that we could probably see another 20 folks leave the utilities department from a retirement standpoint. So Dave and I have talked seriously about this, that we need to put some long-term plan in, or actually a short-term plan in for succession planning. So we may look to the outside for some guidance on that as we move through. And we in the past, from a utilities perspective, we've looked at individuals, but my thought is that it may be too narrow-minded, and that is that we need to look at a group of folks and do some additional trainings and things like that. We don't really have problems so much on the first level of supervision, or what we find is in the second level and into the third level portion of the management group. We also have problems with with our workforce and on our line side, on the electric side, and even to a certain degree, as we bring back this plan next month to talk a little bit more about the workforce portion of it, we don't really have an issue with the water, gas, wastewater side. However, with that said, though, is that we have a lot of young folks that have come on board within the last 24 months, and so there's that learning curve that they have to come through. But we look at vacancies and our numbers, because one of the things that we never find is that we'll never find a water, gas, wastewater installer that knows all three entities, all our three utilities. So they're not hitting the ground running. So we find a lot of laborers or construction folks that might have put in a water main or maybe a water service or something like that, but it's a 3-year program that they have to go through. Same with the line class. We talked about the critical positions on the electrical side where they have to go through these apprenticeships. Well, we're at pretty much at a crucial point at this period of time, is that we don't have enough linemen to train the apprentices that we can come on, so we don't really open up any of the apprenticeships on our line side or in system operations. We have 2.5 bodies where we're obligated, or we're staffed with 6. So we've done some training. There's a person that's 2.5 years into the 3rd year of that apprenticeship. And so another crucial position. Excuse me.
Hey, Dean, let me cut you off on that, and let's save that for the presentation next month.
Right.
I'm glad that was on your minds already.
So, yeah, so it may not come back for the whole succession planning piece next month, but we'll definitely talk about the workforce, but succession planning will come.
All right. Great.
Could we also add an agenda item to talk about how we can be creative and share information and sort of educate ourselves on various topics in a way that lets the public have transparent access to what we're doing so that we can have people come up to speed on different issues more readily, and what are things, and maybe if the city attorney could send somebody to that meeting so we can talk about what we're allowed to do versus not allowed to do, and just sort of make sure that we stay kosher on everything and within the parameters of the Brown Act. But it seems like that would be something that could be really useful, because so that when we have a gap in, like that happened in November, that we could have materials, that we could have something ready to go, that we didn't have to cancel a meeting, and that we could do this with a minimum of impact on staff time. So I'm mindful that, educating us isn't always something that staff has time to do, but if we know there are certain things we want to learn more about, we can either get a third party or, have something so that we can learn more about different topics in ways that would be useful to us. Is that?
Okay, any other suggestions? Is there a motion to adjourn? So, second. I look to the two oldest guys over the day. All in favor? Aye. Adjourn.
Thank you.